Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Stewart. I'm the Director of Education here at the OIF Foundation. I want to welcome everyone to this evening's COVID-19 vaccine Q&A update. If you have joined us for previous vaccine Q&As, this is a continuation of those talks. We want to provide the most up-to-date information possible to our community. During today's talk, we want to remind everyone that this session has live captioning for those who would like to use that. Please go into the Zoom subtitles section and you'll be able to find that there. Also, I want to remind everyone that like other OI Foundation virtual events, this is not telemedicine, which means that the speakers today, while they are medical professionals, they cannot answer your direct medical questions on a live Zoom call like this. If you have specific medical questions, feel free to reach out to the OI Foundation. We can try to connect you with a medical professional in your area. And the speakers can attempt to answer your questions in a more broad sense that are more general. Also, we want to remind people that today, the questions that we're going to be asking the speakers today are a combination of questions that the OI Foundation has made themselves, me with my colleagues, as well as from the participants that have already registered, that have put into the Zoom registration. And near the end of today's talk, we're going to have time for audience questions that are typed into the chat. You'll see that if you type into the chat, we'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to give questions to my colleagues that are on the call, people that with OIF after their name, and we'll try to answer as many audience questions as we can at the end. With that being said, I want to introduce our two speakers that we have with us today. So the first speaker is Admiral Rachel Levine. We are very honored to have Admiral Levine with us here today. She is the 17th Assistant Secretary of Health in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. In addition to that, she also serves as the head of the U.S. Public Health Service Commission Corps, which is one of 8 uniformed services in the United States. She serves as their newly appointed 4-star admiral, and we're very lucky to have her. Throughout her career, she has worked in various contexts, first in academic medicine and as a physician in Pennsylvania, before becoming Pennsylvania's Physician General and Pennsylvania's Secretary of Health before serving her current roles. Admiral Levine, thank you so much for being with us here today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Great, thank you. Also, we have with us here today, if you've attended past OIF COVID virtual resources, you have likely seen his name or heard him talk before. We have Robert Sandy Sandhaus. He is a member of the OIF Foundation's Medical Advisory Council. In addition to being a pulmonologist at Jewish National Health in Denver, Colorado, Dr. Sandhaus is particularly interested in studying lung health for people with OI. And he has been a tremendous resource for the OI Foundation and the OI community at large throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. He has helped advise us or written many of the OI Foundation's COVID-19 toolkit resources, and we are so thankful to have him again with us here this evening. Dr. Sandhaus, hello, thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm honored to be on the podium with Admiral Levine.
Yeah. So with that being said, I know that we have some limited time. We're going to try to keep this about an hour or so this evening. So I want to jump straight into some questions that we have. So we organize our questions into a few big categories for this evening, and we're going to try to rattle off as many as we can. And I'm going to just ask them to both of you, and feel free to answer in any way you see fit. So first off, I want to say that our first big question we have to talk about is the Delta variant. Specifically, I want to talk about the Delta variant and how it impacts people with osteogenesis imperfecta. So particularly, we've talked, particularly with Dr. Sandhaus, many months ago now about COVID-19 and people with OI. And particularly, I want to ask, do we know if the Delta variant impacts people with osteogenesis imperfecta differently than how it impacts the general population?
So I'm happy to take a first stab at that. As far as we know, based on the questionnaires that many of you have completed, the Delta variant, as in the general population, has higher infectivity in OI, just as it does in the general population, but it doesn't necessarily cause more severe disease. It's the relatively dramatic increase in infectivity compared to the original SARS-CoV-2 virus strain. So OI patients, just like the regular public, would be expected to have that same increased risk of the Delta variant. The Delta variant has pretty much overwhelmed the original SARS-CoV-2 virus as the sort of infective agent of choice for COVID.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sandhaus. So I agree completely. So, Delta is called Delta because we're using the Greek alphabet to name the different variants. So there's nothing special about the name. And viruses do constantly change through mutations. Some variants emerge, they might disappear. Others emerge and they have some advantages and to the virus reproducing, and they persist. And these new variants are expected to occur. And so the Delta variant, as you mentioned, is more contagious and spreads more easily than previous variants. And so what we need to do is to take measures to reduce the spread of infection. And the best measure that we have right now are safe and effective COVID-19 vaccinations. These vaccines reduce your risk of contracting COVID-19, including the Delta variant. They decrease your risk of having severe illness, hospitalization, and even death from COVID-19. You are entirely correct. The Delta variant has spread throughout the world, and it's by far the dominant variant that we're seeing. And so it highlights even more than before the importance of our safe and effective vaccination program.
Great, thank you so much. Another question I have is particularly, and to those on the call who want to learn more about COVID vaccines in children, we will definitely be talking about that. But I want to specifically talk about what data do we have about how the Delta variant affects children?
Sure. So the Delta variant, again, is more contagious. And so it is more contagious in adults. And the Delta variant is more contagious in children. And so it is more easily spread from one child to another. So to give you sort of an example, to put it into context, the Delta variant is almost as contagious as chickenpox. So, we have a safe and effective vaccine against chickenpox. But when I trained and was a resident many years ago, I saw many cases of chickenpox, and chickenpox was a very contagious respiratory illness in children. And so, if you saw one child in a class get chickenpox, then most of the kids in that class would get chickenpox. So the Delta variant is not quite as contagious, but almost as contagious as chickenpox. And so we have seen significant increases with the Delta variant of the number of children who have contracted COVID-19. And we know that around 1 to 2% of the children who contract COVID-19 end up getting more severe infections and require to be hospitalized. So as the Delta variant spread this summer and early fall, we saw more and more children that were hospitalized in our great children's hospitals and other hospitals throughout the country, such that actually beds in children's hospitals were quite stretched, especially in the southern states that were very impacted this summer and in the fall by the Delta variant. So it's not more virulent than other strains. It doesn't cause more severe illness in itself. It's just spreads much more easily. Thus, more children got it. Thus, more children were hospitalized, and tragically, some of those children died. Now, the good news is that we know that the Delta variant is controlled by our vaccine. Our vaccines will produce immunity to the Delta variant. It is covered by our safe and effective vaccine programs that we have now. And so we have actually the Pfizer vaccine and a version of the Pfizer vaccine for children that is authorized and recommended by the FDA and the CDC for children 5 to 11. We have a form of the Pfizer vaccine, which is authorized and approved for children, teenagers 11 through 17, and of course, 3 vaccines for adults. And so it highlights again the importance of our vaccine program.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much. So I think one other big question that I had was about just trying to, I mean, I guess I'm giving you maybe an impossible question, but asking you to predict the future a little bit.
I'd like to hear that.
Yeah. So what do we, to the best of your knowledge, we've talked about, in previous calls, and I'm sure, just if you open the news for 10 seconds, you're going to hear about vaccination rates and vaccine programs. And I guess I'm curious, what do you think the next few months will look like in terms of infection rates?
Well, I wish I could predict the future, but I can't. And so it really, a lot of it depends upon what the public does. And it depends upon the public getting their safe and effective vaccines. We know that getting children and adults vaccinated is the best way to work through and out of this pandemic. Now, we've made a tremendous amount of progress. 81% of adults have one shot. 70% of adults are fully vaccinated. For adolescents, about a little bit less than 50% of adolescents are immunized. The children's program has just started, but we have the tools available now, and people have the ability to protect themselves, their family, their community, and our nation. We have the tools to accelerate our path out of this pandemic. We have tests that are available. We have vaccines that are available. We have therapeutics for those who contract the virus. We have remdesivir. We have other medicines for people who are hospitalized. We have monoclonal antibodies for those before hospitalization to prevent them from getting sick. But we have more work to do. And so it really depends upon the public. We are shipping 1.2 billion doses globally to really help the fight globally, because we are all in this together. What the COVID-19 pandemic has truly taught us is that we are all interconnected. And the decisions that each of us make influence our family, again, our friends, our community, and our nation, and influence our world. And so we need to work together. We need to work for the common good, and that means getting vaccinated.
I just add that as a physician in Denver, Colorado at National Jewish Health, we're living through a major surge in Colorado. And it's clear, if you look at the admissions to the intensive care unit, that well over 90% of those that are admitted to the ICU are unvaccinated individuals. You might hear about breakthrough infections in people who are vaccinated, but they're much more rare than in vaccinated people. And even if those people do get COVID, those vaccinated people, they're much, much less likely to wind up with a serious infection that requires hospitalization or intensive care unit time.
In addition, we have our booster program. So those 65 and older should get boosters according to the recommendations from the CDC, depending upon what vaccine they got. In addition, we want those on first responders and those on the front lines that get exposed to patients on a regular basis to get boosters, and those with conditions, chronic medical conditions that might predispose them to get very severe COVID-19 to get boosters. And so we have our primary series program, our booster program, and our childhood and adolescent vaccine program. All of these programs are to help our nation and the world work through and past the COVID-19 pandemic.
And actually, on that note, I want to talk more about boosters and booster shots. And actually, first question is, could we just go over some definitions so that we know we're all on the same page? What is a booster shot, and what's the difference between a booster shot and getting a third shot of the vaccine?
Sure.
We've heard that a little bit in the media.
So they're sometimes used interchangeably, but they're a little different. For example, we have recommended that in people who are immunosuppressed get a third shot of the vaccine, that their series would include a third shot, because we know that people who are immunosuppressed do not have the immune response to the vaccine that others might have, and thus they are vulnerable. So that would be a third dose. A booster dose is that you had the primary series, 2 doses of Pfizer or Moderna, 1 dose of Johnson & Johnson. And then because we are finding that the immunity might wane after a certain period of time, and it's different for the 2 different types of vaccines, that we need a booster dose. Now, sometimes the strength is different. So for example, in the Moderna dose, the booster is about 50% of the strength of the original dose. But for the other vaccines, it's the same. But that would be the difference.
Great, thank you.
And that raises the issue that I'm frequently asked: are osteogenesis imperfecta patients immunosuppressed by virtue of their osteogenesis imperfecta? And the answer to that is no. There's no evidence that osteogenesis imperfecta affects the immune response to, say, a vaccine or to the virus, the COVID-causing virus as well. But it doesn't mean that an OI patient is protected against other diseases that might lead to immunodeficiency or therapies that might immunosuppress someone. So that's important if you have a concern about that or a question about that, to talk to your specific doctor who knows your medication regimen and your particular situation.
I would agree with that completely.
Great, thank you so much. And actually, Dr. Sandhaus, you answered my next question, which is, does having OI make someone immunocompromised? It seems the answer is
no.
No. So can we talk a little bit more about boosters? Can you explain, so you hear about it so much in the news, where are we in the timeline? It feels like every time you hear about it, they will be imminently available to all Americans, but we're not quite there yet. Can you go into a bit more detail?
Sure. So it depends which vaccine you received. So we'll have to take them sequentially. So if you received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and I got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine last spring, then you're eligible for a booster. Anyone is eligible for a booster 2 months after your initial vaccine. We recommend a booster. And anyone 18 or older, because it's only licensed for 18 and older. And so about 3 weeks ago, when that was announced, I got my booster. If you received Moderna or Pfizer and you meet the criteria, we'll talk about that in a moment, you're eligible for a booster 6 months after your second shot.
Okay.
So if you receive Moderna or Pfizer, those are the mRNA, the messenger RNA vaccines, and you meet criteria, we're going to talk about that in a second, it's 6 months, not 2 months. Okay? Now, right now, the recommendations for a booster for Johnson & Johnson, anybody who got Johnson & Johnson 18 and older can get a booster 2 months later. For Pfizer and Moderna, there are some parameters for patients. Age 65 and older, you're eligible for a booster 6 months after your second shot for either Moderna or Pfizer. If you're 18 through 64 and you're at high risk for severe COVID-19, you're eligible for a booster. If you have any question, ask your doctor or your healthcare professional. If you're 18 through 64 and you live in a long-term care facility, we recommend you get a booster. If you are 18 or 64 and you have frequent exposure to COVID-19, like medical professionals, but it might be other type of first responders, then you would get a booster. And so those are currently the recommendations. There is also a mix and match system. So for instance, if you got the Johnson & Johnson and you want to get Moderna or Pfizer as your second shot, you can do that too. So we've tried to be very flexible as people work with their doctor. So that is the current recommendations for boosters. Now, there are current deliberations. The FDA is looking at a Pfizer application to expand booster eligibility. The CDC would review things after that. So watch the news, and there might be more news coming this week or next week about any changes in eligibility. And we're trying to keep it as simple as possible, with a complex field, but as simple as possible. And if you have any questions, you can certainly go to the CDC websites or ask your doctor.
Great, thank you. So it sounds like it is many people are able to get a booster shot right now. And it sounds like that 6-month period is relatively close for many others.
That's right.
Can we talk about flu vaccines? So I know it's one thing that the OI Foundation, we send out every year is reminders to get their flu shots. But I think there is a concern from some people about, one, do the two shots interact with each other at all? And should people be planning ahead for that, making special considerations?
So thank you for that very important question. Now that we're in, the middle of November, and we have entered flu season. So there is no interaction between the vaccines. People should absolutely be getting their flu vaccines right now if you haven't gotten it. You can actually get your flu vaccine the same day you might get your COVID vaccine or your COVID boosters. The flu vaccine won't protect you at all from COVID, and the COVID-19 vaccines won't protect you against the flu. So it is very important for people to get their flu vaccine. We had an attenuated flu season last year, probably because of many of the containment and mitigation measures that we had in place with masks and hand washing and social distancing. We are concerned about sort of the twin epidemics of pandemic COVID-19 and the flu season that we might get, how hospitals could be overburdened. So it's more important than ever for people to get their flu vaccine. Dr. Sandhaus?
I agree. First, I'll give you the N=1 anecdote. I got my flu vaccine and my booster shot of the Pfizer drug on the same day, different arms, and didn't have any kind of side effect other than a sore arm, and I can't even remember which arm it was. So the only reason not to get them the same day is if you have a medical curiosity about which might cause a side effect or not. Talking about side effects, I do want to point out that even though, as with any immunization, there are potential side effects, they are rare. Obviously, they get emphasized in the media when they happen. But the fact is that any side effect from the vaccine on a balanced scale of risks of what COVID can do to you versus risk of a side effect, the balance is very much in favor of getting the vaccine because of the high rate of hospitalization and intensive care stay and potentially death if you're not vaccinated.
So that's entirely correct. The reactions to COVID-19 vaccine or the booster is really pretty common to other vaccines. You might have a little fever for a day. You might have a headache or feel a little bit tired. Your arm can feel sore, and within 1 to 2 days, those side effects are gone. It is possible to have a serious side effect, but they are very, very rare. These are safe and effective vaccinations, and the consequences of getting COVID-19 can be very, very serious. These vaccines have been very well studied by the companies that make them. They have gone through review and authorization by the FDA, review and recommendations by the CDC. There have been over 450 million doses of these vaccines given in the United States, and that doesn't count the tens and hundreds of millions of doses that have been given worldwide. So these are very safe and effective vaccines. COVID-19 remains a significant threat in the United States and globally.
And Admiral Levine, I appreciate you. Your comments always tee up very nicely the next thing I want to talk about. So that's perfect. So particularly I want to talk about, so obviously it's like this little section is titled Vaccines in Children. I want to ask to both of you about, so we've heard that vaccines, or some vaccines, and you can talk about this more, are available now for children 5 to 12 years old. What had to get proven in order for the various government agencies involved, I know there's a whole network of them involved, what has to get shown with hard facts and evidence for vaccines to be approved in children?
Sure. So as you said, the Pfizer vaccine is approved for children 5 through 11. And then the Pfizer vaccine is also approved for teens 12 through 17. And to get approved, the vaccine has to go through rigorous testing and clinical trials. And these trials were done with children by Pfizer, and there are trials going on with Moderna now. And then all of that data is reviewed by the FDA for their authorization. And then all that data is reviewed by the CDC and their committees for their recommendations. So these vaccines have been through rigorous testing, thorough review by our federal agencies. Now, and I want to point out the Pfizer vaccine is specifically formulated for children ages 5 through 11. And there were thousands of children in the clinical trials, and it was shown to be much more than 90% effective at preventing COVID-19 with no real safety concerns. And they're continuing to undergo intensive safety monitoring.
Great, thank you. So another question is, and we had talked a little bit about like side effects of the vaccine. Do side effects of the vaccine, do they differ in children versus adults? And particularly, for parents, are there certain things that they should be looking out for once their child receives a vaccine?
So for the side effects, the routine side effects don't differ between children and adults. The most common side effects would be a sore arm, perhaps a fever for at the most 2 days, some tiredness, maybe some headache. With particularly the Moderna vaccine, although maybe a few cases with Pfizer, for older adolescents and young adults, there were a few cases of what is called myocarditis, which is an inflammation of the heart. That can be serious, but actually the case that this has been reported before, the cases that we're seeing were actually very, very mild, requiring little, if any, treatment. And so, we're watching that. That really was not reported in the 5 to 11 age group, but we're continuing to monitor with our safety monitoring program for any information about side effects, safety issues, or adverse events in the childhood vaccine, the adolescent vaccine, and the adult vaccine. So we have a number of systems through the FDA. We have other systems through the CDC, monitoring those very, very closely.
Great, thank you. And to Dr. Sandhaus, is there any contraindications about the COVID vaccine for children with OI?
Well, actually, I need to turn to Dr. Levine, Admiral Levine, for the answer to that. I don't see any children, and all I know is what I read in the news. So please.
Sure. There are no specific side effects for patients with OI that we would worry about with the vaccinations.
Great. Thank you so much. So now I have sort of one last question before moving on to the audience questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to type in a question to one of my colleagues, Melissa or Erica or Danielle, and we will answer your questions the second half of this event. But I want to talk about other non-vaccine COVID treatments that have, again, we've been hearing a little bit in the news. Particularly, I want to talk about Merck's new pill that is in development. I have the name typed out here. Do I know how to pronounce it? Definitely not. About this pill that you take once you get COVID. I was curious if one of you could just speak on it a little bit more and
Sure.
explain who it is intended for and what it does.
Sure. Well, we are looking forward to the development of these oral antiviral medications, which would be very, very helpful to prevent people from getting sick if they contract COVID-19 and treat them out of the hospital in a simple way. And so in the last number of weeks, actually, both Merck and Pfizer have announced promising data from their clinical trials showing that their pills cut the risk of hospitalization or death in high-risk groups. For Merck, it was more than 50%, and for Pfizer, maybe well over 80 or 85% in their clinical trials. These are pills, so they're easy to use, and they're both pending FDA authorization. The FDA has asked a group of external experts to review the medication, and we'll see about that review, and then we'll see what the FDA and its panels say in terms of safety and effectiveness of these antivirals. So, right now we have monoclonal antibodies for teens and adults, which are available out of the hospital if people are at high risk. For hospitalized patients, we have intravenous medications, remdesivir and others, but an easily accessible oral medication would be very, very helpful. And we will await the results of the evaluation by the FDA. But I want to emphasize that we have a safe and effective way to prevent people from getting COVID-19 now. And that's the vaccinations that we were talking about. So we don't want people to wait and maybe not get their vaccines because there's going to be an oral medication potentially approved by the FDA in December or January or 2022. People need to protect themselves and their family right now from this, again, more contagious Delta variant. And we have the power to do that right now with the vaccination program.
I will add something about the antivirals, since I was involved in the development of one of the antivirals that many of you know, Tamiflu for influenza. And much like Tamiflu, when and if these get approved, it's going to be very important to take them at the first sign that you have COVID. It's the longer that you wait before starting these, and this is in common with people who have monoclonal antibodies indicated for their treatment. The sooner you get started on them, if they're approved, the better chance there is of them curbing the infection enough to save lives in hospitalization. And again, I have to emphasize this is based on preliminary data that's been presented to the public and not on an FDA approval.
Great, thank you both so much. So I have here a whole series of audience questions. I was hoping just to go over some. And if you have any questions for the speakers, feel free to put them into the chat again. So I'm going to just list off some of them, knowing that some of these we've indirectly or directly answered before. One is specifically about, talking about size and weight of the person being vaccinated. So for those on the call who may have different levels of familiarity with the different types of OI, OI can affect your size and particularly your size and weight. And people are asking about, it seems like we are told, particularly for the RNA vaccines, 2 doses across the board. For people who are much smaller than the general population, people well below 100 pounds, many people with OI are wheelchair users, say, who are 3 feet tall and they weigh 50 or 60 pounds. Are they still taking 2 doses, or are those the same 2 doses that the linebacker in the NFL is taking?
The
Yes.
answer to that is yes.
Great minds think alike.
Yeah.
So it's the same dose for adolescents and adults. For adolescents, the Pfizer vaccine. For adults, all 3 of the vaccines. There is no difference in terms of size in terms of the vaccines, in terms of the dose of the vaccine or the sequence of the vaccine. Dr. Sandhaus?
I agree. And it's not, the pediatric dosing, which is often either done by weight or in the case of the of the Pfizer vaccine, is determined by clinical trial and isn't changed based on the weight of the young child that are approved to get it. For the kinds of things where things are dosed based on weight are other sorts of drugs, not vaccines.
So the dose for the 5 to 11-year-olds it's a different formulation. So it's about a third of the dose when you look at it, but it's not using the same vials. It's a completely different formulation that pediatricians and family physicians and community health centers are using for the children who are 5 to 11. It comes in a different colored vial. It's different.
Okay, and so therefore, I guess like in a similar vein, a child with, say, severe OI who is very underweight from, the average size of someone in their age group is still getting the typical child dosage.
That's correct.
Right.
Okay. Another question we've been getting is asking, is there any concern or evidence around the impact of the vaccines and inflammation, and particularly, is there any data or findings on that? This is a concern for some community members.
So the only inflammation that there's data about is when I mentioned for the mRNA vaccines, the Pfizer and the Moderna, for older adolescents and young adults, a potential risk of myocarditis, which is an inflammation of the heart muscle. And this has been very rare, and actually in the cases that developed, very mild. There is no evidence for any type of total body inflammation, no.
Okay, thank you. So I also wanted to go back to a previous statement you had said before, and I just wanted to clarify it too. So we've heard a little bit about mixing of the vaccines, particularly around boosters as well. So Admiral Levine, just correct me if I'm wrong, did you say that if one had, so I had heard that you could mix, say, the Moderna and Pfizer, and my logic goes, oh, because they're both they're both the same technology, that's fine. But did you say earlier that you could get a Johnson & Johnson and then a Pfizer or Moderna, like that mixing as well is okay?
So for the primary series, you should get the same vaccine. So that if you got a Pfizer vaccine for your first dose, you should get a Pfizer vaccine for your second dose. If you got Moderna for your first, Moderna for your second. If you got Johnson & Johnson, it's that the primary series is 1 dose. For the boosters, you can mix and match. So if you got a primary series for Pfizer, if you chose, you could get Moderna or Pfizer, although I'm not sure there's a reason to change, but you could, for example, if one was not available. And the same with if you got Moderna first and then you wanted to switch to Pfizer. Again, there's not a particular rationale to do that, but you could if that's what was available for your booster. There is some evidence that if you got a Johnson & Johnson and you're going to get a booster 2 months later, that you will get a very good immune response with a Johnson & Johnson booster. You might get an even bigger immune response with either Pfizer or Moderna booster. And so any of those are okay for the booster doses.
Great, thank you. That sounds like it makes things much easier logistically. Basically, as far as the booster dose goes, like almost whatever is available to you and easiest.
That's why the studies were done by the NIH to look at that, because when you're due for your booster, you might not have the one that you had for your primary series available because of just logistics, although we do have a lot of vaccine available. And so we wanted to make it as easy as possible for people.
Great, thank you. Similar to the inflation question, inflammation, sorry. We had another question around, is there any concerns about particularly this person's asking about the J&J vaccine, and asking, is there any worries or thoughts around risks with clotting, particularly for wheelchair users with this vaccine? Have we heard anything along those lines?
So first, I'll just talk about the Johnson & Johnson, and then I might, and vaccine in general, I might ask Dr. Sandhaus about his thoughts about OI, its patients themselves. For Johnson & Johnson, yes, there was a very small risk of someone getting a blood clot after the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Probably that risk would be in young adult women more than in any other group, but it is very, very rare. The reason why it was highlighted is that if someone has a blood clot and they're within a certain period of time of getting the vaccine, the treatment is different. And so that makes it particularly important for the physician who might be treating the person with the blood clot to know is that the treatment would not be with the most common medicine, heparin, but it would be with different type of treatment. And so it is very rare, but it does exist. Is there an increased risk with patients who are wheelchair bound or with OI? Not that I know of. Dr. Sandhaus?
I think that there is probably a slight, I don't know any data about this, but patients in wheelchairs for any reason tend to have at least enough of an increased risk that it's watched for carefully in people who are in wheelchairs. It's simply the stasis of venous stasis in the veins of the leg and slightly higher. But the problem is that there are genes that can make you more likely to get a blood clot, regardless of whether you have OI or not, things along those lines. It's just something that has to be thought of in order to rule it out or in. And the other thing I'd say regarding both inflammation and blood clots is that COVID itself is an extremely high risk, gives you an extremely high risk of blood clots and a systemic inflammatory response. That's actually kind of what drives people into the ICU, is the organ injury that's caused by massive inflammation from the body's reaction to a COVID infection. So although there might be, you want inflammation at the site of a vaccine, because that takes the right immune cells there to start the process of making antibodies and cellular response to the vaccine. So there is inflammation, if you will, but the systemic kind of inflammation that does organ damage and everything is much more characteristic of the infection itself with the SARS-CoV-2 virus.
So I would like to emphasize that point. Dr. Sandhaus is entirely correct, is that we have to remember how serious of an infection COVID-19 is, which can cause significant lung damage and inflammation and infection, but can also cause inflammation in many other parts of the body, including the heart and the brain and the blood vessels themselves. And so actually the risk of having blood clots is much higher with the infection than anything with the vaccines. And the other is, though, if people have a question about which vaccine is best for them, then that will be a great question for their personal healthcare provider. And then those things will be discussed. And then, you should get the vaccine that your healthcare provider thinks is best for you.
Great, thank you. We have another question here. Actually, this was from the audience registration, talking about, so they're asking about their daughter in particular, but I actually think they can be more broadly asked of, say if someone is fully vaccinated and they get a breakthrough case, and so they are quarantining at home and doing everything that we are recommending they do to stop the further spread of the virus. How long should they be quarantining, knowing that they're fully vaccinated, and also, like, how long will they test positive?
So they could test positive for a while. Now, there are two different types of tests. There's tests that are looking for the DNA, the PCR tests, and there are tests looking for other parts of the virus called antigen tests. And you can test positive for a while because you might have broken up pieces of the virus in your system, but you might not have any active viral infection. So we do not use a viral test of cure. When you have no symptoms, then for a period of time and you continue to have no symptoms, then you can come out of isolation. You should follow the CDC guidelines. So all of that is available on the CDC website.
Great, thank you. And we will, and
those recommendations are true either for the rare cases of breakthrough infections on people who are vaccinated or people who have a primary mild infection with COVID. The same recommendations are the case in terms of isolation and when you can come out of isolation.
But we don't recommend serial tests of cure like might be used for other. It's not a predictable or valuable thing. There are set recommendations on the CDC website about in terms of when you are no longer contagious, and it has to do with a period of time after your symptoms are done.
Great, thank you so much. So someone is also asking, so do you think we'll just need to get vaccinated or get a booster every 6 months or maybe every year or whatever the cycle ends up settling into? Is this just a thing we should expect from now on?
We don't know. So, if everybody remembers, this is a novel coronavirus, which means a new coronavirus. It didn't exist in the world 2 years ago. And so we are learning all the time. And so, we have learned through our data and data in other countries, the importance of the booster program because of waning immunity after the primary season. But we don't know after, for example, people might get a booster, how long that immunity will last. There's every reason to think that it will be long lasting, but how long that is, we simply don't know. And we will observe the data. And as always, we will make data-driven recommendations.
Great, thank you so much. So that is it for, I think, questions we have right now. Unless an audience member wants to type in and give us a last second question, we'll be happy to ask that. Admiral Levine, we want to thank you so much for being with us here this evening. It is greatly appreciated, your voice and leadership with this. To our community members who are on the call with us, I want to let everyone know that if you want to find further OI Foundation COVID resources, please check out our website at www.oif.org, and you can go to our COVID-19 toolkit, which is right at the top. You can't miss it. And you'll find other resources we've made on this topic. We welcome you all to take a look at that. Or you can just email us directly at bonelink@oif.org, and we'll be happy to answer your questions there. Dr. Sandhaus and Admiral Levine, thank you both so much for being with us. And I think our whole community is so grateful for your expertise and your wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. A pleasure to be here.